Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, in Nigeria, there are fears for more than 100 girls still missing after their school was attacked by Boko Haram extremists earlier this week. The raid has echoes of the notorious Chibok abductions of 2014. Also, tough but hopeful, the first budget under South Africa's new president brings in the first VAT hike in 25 years. The government says it's had to make tough trade-offs to improve an economy that suffered under previous leader Jacob Zuma. And Djibouti's investing heavily in the expansion of its ports as it aims to become a gateway to sub-Saharan Africa. But that's meant taking on big loans. Whilst growth has picked up, that's having little effect on the widespread poverty in the country. But first, dozens of parents and relatives of more than 100 missing girls converged on their school in the northeastern town of Yobe on Wednesday. They're demanding answers after the pupils failed to be found following an attack on the institution by Boko Haram extremists on Monday night. After Islamists stormed the government girls' science secondary school, authorities were reluctant to say that the girls were taken and claimed the children had fled to nearby villages. Well, families fear that it is a repeat of the notorious Chibok mass abductions in which almost 300 schoolgirls were kidnapped by the militants in 2014. Sam Olukoya tells us more.
There are actually conflicting reports about what exactly happened. What everybody knows is that Boko Haram fighters stormed the school with guns and explosives, fired into the school and entered the place. They carted away food. But subsequently, it's very unclear as to whether they abducted some students or not. But the government itself is admitting that about 50 students are missing. But some parents said the figures should be far more than that. Some other people are putting the figures at about 100. As to whether these missing persons were abducted, it still remains unclear, but there are fears that they might have been abducted because some eyewitnesses said they had girls crying inside the vehicles that the Boko Haram brought to the place as they were leaving. They had some girls crying for help inside the vehicles.
Sam, the Chibok kidnapping of 2014 became notorious, but Boko Haram is supposedly much weaker now than they were at the time. Do you believe that they still have the capacity and resources to launch mass abductions on such a scale?
Yes, I think they have the capacity. I mean, given that the northeastern Nigeria, where they are fighting, is a very porous area, they are able to move freely in some areas, and they are capable of doing this. The fact that they were in the school for about 3 hours unchallenged says a lot about what they are capable of doing. I'm hearing that there were security men in the school and they were withdrawn shortly before this attack. And the suspicion is that Boko Haram had information that security men have been withdrawn from the school before, and this might have prompted them to launch this attack. And of course, abducting girls is a very highly prized, it will be a highly prized possession for Boko Haram. Potentially, they could use these girls to bargain for ransom and also to trade them off with some of their members in government custody.
Sam Olukoya there for us in Nigeria. Well, South Africa's finance minister said that the budget is tough but hopeful. For the first time since the end of apartheid, the government's brought in a sales tax hike. It's a risky move for the new leader, Cyril Ramaphosa, but he faces an uphill battle to revamp the economy in the wake of former President Jacob Zuma's 9 years at the helm. Nicholas Chamat tells us more.
South Africa's VAT will rise from 14% to 15% in April. The hike is the first in 25 years. The aim is to cut the deficit and stabilise debt.
The 1% increase in VAT will affect 80% of those who are at the higher spectrum of income earners in South Africa.
The finance minister said the poor would remain protected through untaxed basic foodstuffs and above-inflation increases in social income. But economists warn the measure would still hurt the poor.
This is, of course, quite hard on all South Africans. One must bear in mind, however, that the majority of VAT is paid for by middle to upper income groups, but proportionate to their income, obviously the lower income groups will feel the pinch.
President Jacob Zuma was forced by his party, the ANC, to step down last week, following a series of scandals that brought much instability to the nation's economy.
We haven't had that stability. We haven't known which way our equity markets are going from one day to the next, up one day, down the next. Our currency, weak 1 minute, strong the next. Our bond markets, weak 1 minute, strong the next. We haven't had any sort of stability, and it's very difficult to plan as a businessman or as an individual or even as a government.
Improving the economy will be one of new President Cyril Ramaphosa's most difficult tasks. During Zuma's 9-year presidency, unemployment rose to record levels, averaging 27%.
In other news, Liberia's new leader was in Paris on Wednesday for his first trip off the continent since taking office. George Weah, a former international soccer star, met with his French counterpart, Emmanuel Macron, and several sports personalities at the Élysée Palace. The presidents say that they want to revive the relationship between their countries and announce the creation of a fund to support sports projects in Africa. 2 French soldiers have been killed on patrol in Mali. Milien Muga and Timothée Dernancourt died on Wednesday when their armoured vehicle was hit by an improvised explosive device near the border with Niger. The men were members of Operation Barkhane, an anti-terrorism force fighting extremist groups operating out of the Sahel. 5 police officers and an off-duty soldier have been killed in an armed raid on a police station in a rural town in South Africa. Gunmen reportedly stole weapons and a van after targeting the building in Ngokobo in Eastern Cape Province. 2 of the victims are said to have been abducted before their bodies were later found by the roadside. Authorities are investigating and say that they don't yet know the motive for the attack. In Cameroon, families of 9 French-speaking men who went missing in early December are demanding answers. The crew had been sent to repair a bridge in the city of Mamfe in the Anglophone southwest. It's at the heart of a secessionist struggle by English-speaking separatists. Our correspondents report.
Surrounded by photos of her husband, Marie still hopes to see Francois again. He's one of 9 people who have been missing for more than 2 months. Marie is expecting her 5th child and says she struggles to answer questions from her other children about what's happened to their father.
I don't want to hear the word death. The children have been very affected. Every time they come back from school, they ask, "Mom, is Dad back yet?" I don't know what to say to them.
8 other engineers and drivers disappeared along with Francois on December 6th. Their relatives haven't had news either. The crew had been sent to Mamfe to repair a bridge. The city's at the heart of a conflict between Anglophone secessionists and Cameroonian defense forces. Unhappy with the response from authorities, families of the missing have formed a collective that meets weekly at this radio station. This committee is led by a well-known local radio host who's determined to keep their demands for answers in the public eye.
If they are dead, then we will have to accept it and we'll begin the funeral ceremonies. We will bring together between 50 and 100,000 people, and everyone, including government officials, will see the bodies in the coffins.
Despite their fervent hopes of finding the Mamfe missing 9 alive, that's looking increasingly less likely. Questioned about them a few days ago, the military commander of the region suggested that they may have been attacked by armed Anglophone separatists.
How can you comprehend sending a company to build a bridge and realize that these criminals can kill every single engineer as well as the drivers?
The Anglophone crisis has escalated over recent months and increasingly led to fatal clashes between secessionists and the military in the northwest and southwest of the country.
And finally, it's a tiny state in the Horn of Africa, but it's thinking big. Djibouti aims to exploit its coastal locations on one of the world's busiest sea lanes to become a gateway to sub-Sahara. But the investment doesn't come cheap. Foreign debt has skyrocketed over the last couple of years, and whilst growth has picked up, poverty also remains widespread. Duncan Woodside and Thais Brook report from Djibouti City.
Djibouti's ports are major arteries for Africa's Horn and well beyond, since many countries are landlocked. 3 new terminals opened across the tiny nation last year, promising hundreds of millions of dollars in fresh revenues. And there is more to come.
We also have other ports and projects which will be built in the region of Damerjog. These deep water ports are for gas and for livestock exports.
Logistics and transport already account for 2/3 of the country's productivity. The economy grew by 7% last year, up from around 4% a few years ago. But the infrastructure investment has caused foreign debt to rocket by more than half in just 2 years.
Investment in rail and ports will bear fruit. It will not only ensure a return on investment, they will be significant enough to repay the debts. Beyond that, it will contribute continuously to economic growth.
But this state-led development has left many behind. Balbala is one of the capital's poorest areas. Illegally built slums dominate the landscape. Mariam was evicted from her old home. She's unable to feed her 7 children properly, and one of them is sick.
I live with my neighbours. Where we lived before was burned down by authorities. We lost everything, our clothes. Even the children's clothes went up in smoke. It's a life of misery, and I hope we can leave one day.
Mariam is not the only person struggling to feed her family. The poverty level here in Djibouti is extremely high. While down from 47% a few years ago, it's still at 41%. The government claims that its massive infrastructure investment programme will create tens of thousands of jobs, alleviating poverty.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa for now. Thanks very much for joining us. Do so again if you can. Take care.